About to delay everybody. Good morning. It is Friday, January 21st, 2022. It's about 8:40 in the morning. We're at a Board of Education Finance Committee meeting right now at the town of Darien. So I'll kick it right off. Just one disclosure, I might have to leave a little early. So if I walk out during public comment, I apologize. I had a pre-scheduled business meeting and the snow day screwed it up, but I will rewatch the video after the fact. So the first agenda item is the review of December 2021, 2022 financial report. And Rich, I'll hand it over to you.
So the financial report through December projects a year-end positive balance of $339,239. The forecast does assume we will be reimbursed for all items lost during Storm Ida. One update since then is we did receive the first check of $176,000 from FIRMA on Wednesday, and we're going to get another check by the end of the month of $108,000.
Hey, Rich, could you just put it a little closer?
Yep. So we did receive a check on Wednesday for $176,000. Second check has been issued for $108,000, which we should receive by the end of the month. So we're just waiting for about $83,000 left from that storm. And the total cost for Storm Ida stand at just over $369,000. The total change from the previous month is $234,979. Just highlighting some of the big changes. The first is excess costs. We did file on December 1st claims of $3.6 million. We are still assuming a reimbursement rate of 67.5%, but with this higher filing amount, it would provide additional revenue of just over $240,000. And we'll talk about the reimbursement rate when we get to RC24. We did receive some reimbursements for some employees out on workers' comp. That is about $30,000. The revised estimate for the DEI work is $16,000 less than the previous forecast. Special education legal fees are trending under budget by about $15,000. We do have some salary savings from some vacant positions, a high school custodian and an ELP para. Consultants have a favorable balance of $5,000. We have some favorable balances in some high school clubs. Professional development in RC16 has a favorable balance. Travel in RC19, a favorable balance of $2,500. Fitch supplies, a favorable balance of $2,000. Some clubs and councils at the middle school of $873. Supplies at DSS is slightly less because of some adjustments for about $4,000. ELP tuition is down another $4,700 as we did reclassify another student to special education. We do have some additions to RC28 COVID, $10,000 for some additional PPEs. As flagged during the budget process, building rentals are expected to be down slightly due to some lower enrollment and use of our buildings by about $6,000. Turnover savings are reduced by about $9,000. Part-time help in facilities is a deficit of $15,000, which we do have a transfer for. Utilities are slightly less at $13,000, and then in RC28, we did include $34,000 for the new teacher MOU. Highlighting just the general education RCs, they are forecasted at a positive $146,000. Special education RC is a positive $236,000, and that's largely excess cost related. And then the COVID RCs negative $44,000. So just to highlight some of the changes going through the RCs, as I mentioned earlier, custodians are a positive $5,700 due to relief of absence. The Fitch supplies is a positive balance of $1,000. That does mirror what you saw in the fiscal 23 budget. A slight positive balance in clubs and councils at the middle school. The Geography B and Literary Magazine are not running. There are no changes at the elementary RCs. As I mentioned before, RC12, we are forecasting a deficit of $15,000. We did have to hire 2 temporary employees to cover for 2 employees who are out on workers' comp. So there is a recommended transfer. It's really an accounting adjustment to use the reimbursement for workers' comp to cover those part-time costs, but it does cross object codes. And then building rentals is a negative $5,920. We did get some information from some usage groups that they expect to use our buildings less. And so the spring is typically when we rent our buildings the most. So as we get more information, we'll update that forecast as well. RC16 consultant shows a positive balance. We will recommend a portion of that money to be used to fund the DEI initiative. Legal fees continue to trend down by about $28,000. Then professional development in RC16 is a positive balance for $3,000. Moving to curriculum, there is a projected deficit of $40,000 for the recommended DEI consultant. Travel shows a projected surplus of $2,500, and that mirrors the fiscal 23 recommended budget as well. Moving to RC 24, special education legal fees are trending under budget for the first 5 months by about 15,000. Moving to excess costs, as I mentioned earlier, we did file for 3,678,132. If the reimbursement rate is what we budgeted at 67.5, it would mean a reimbursement of 2,482,730, or $240,000 above budget. We did have 6 additional students in the claim than projected, which is why the additional amount. We did include the estimated revenues from the state of Connecticut. Based on the December 1st filing, they are actually showing a reimbursement rate of 81.98%. When asked, they did suggest that they expected to drop after the March submission. One of the reasons they said is for the higher reimbursement rate, districts across the state of Connecticut have seen lower outplacement costs this year, in large part because those students who might have gone to a residential placement are not going to a residential placement still because of COVID. So depending on what happens with the March submission, we will update the reimbursement rate. And the first reimbursement comes at the end of February. RC 25 fixed, as I mentioned earlier, utilities, heat, and electricity still have a favorable balance. And then workers' comp is forecasted with a positive balance of 34,098, and those are reimbursements for KERMA for some employees who have been out on workers' comp. And we are recommending to use that balance as a transfer. And then going to RC 26, we still have salary savings for a teacher aide position in the ELP. And then ELP tuition is a negative balance of 34,000. Again, we did have another student who was reclassified to special education. RC 28 COVID, there was a teacher MOU that granted an additional personal day. So we are assuming 75% of teachers take this additional personal day. And that's based on the experience from last year. If that holds true, the deficit would be $34,000. Should more than 75% of the teachers take a personal day, we would then have to bring forward another transfer. So we'll watch how that kind of plays out over the months. Since the MOU was only signed towards the end of December, I believe, we don't really have that much experience yet. So as
MOU.
memorandum of understanding.
Okay, thank you.
So as we get forward in the year, if that experience starts to trend up, we'll have to bring another transfer forward to the board. And then health supplies is forecasted at a deficit of 10,000. There was an additional need for some PPEs, mostly masks. We did see a run on supplies towards the end of December and beginning of January. Just moving to the grant financial report.
Or do you want to just stop there?
Sure.
We could. Is that okay with everyone? Questions?
Yes. We have a number of clubs and councils not running. Is that
You're good.
because of COVID that they're not running, or are we seeing a trend in less clubs and councils?
It's less enrollment. It's really enrollment driven, so not as many students signing up for the clubs.
Thank you.
Dennis, any? All right, so I got a few. I guess let's go to the cost reimbursement. So I put wow next to it. But if you, again, just take a linear average of what we would expect in the second half of the year to get that 67.5 assumption, that's down near 53%. So maybe give a little color what you're getting from the state. I know you said we get an update in March, but
So everybody submits their filings on December 1st based on what they think they're going to get for the full year of expenditures. So a lot of districts did not submit for what the state told us, a lot of out-of-district placement costs. So if students, primarily for residential students, end up going back to those residential placements, districts across the state will end up submitting higher expenditures,
Yeah.
what they'll say. They likely won't submit the full cost because you're 6 months essentially into the school year, and so you would only pay that half a cost. So even if it was a high placement for another district of, let's say, $250,000, you might only be paying $125,000 in this case because half the experience is essentially gone. So it's likely that will be above that 67.5%, but the state did expect it to go below that 82. So it'll probably fall somewhere in that 70 to 82% range. But given that nothing's finalized, we left it at 67.5%.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, that first reimbursement happens February 28th. So we'll get 75% of what we should expect then. And by the end of February, we should have a good idea of what the reimbursement rate will be.
Adventures and easy
So Rich,
budgeting.
Rich,
Oh, my goodness.
did you say by the end of February, you'd have a clear indication of where that rate might go.
We'll have a better understanding,
Better,
but not
yeah.
a definitive understanding.
But it sounds like your estimate is very conservative, meaning,
Very conservative.
okay,
Yes.
I might use the word extremely. All right, thank you. Let's go to the MOU grants. So my first question, you outlined it, you're using a 75% assumption of utilization of days. Why not budget for a higher number and ask for a higher transfer on that front? I look at last year and it was a year that we had not had a number of teachers, actually students in the classroom for many, many days. This is a much different year. So, from a finance director standpoint, give me the methodology behind your decision.
So part of it is we don't have a full year left to go. So there's a smaller window in which staff can actually take that extra personal day. While everybody's been granted it, even without that extra personal day, teachers don't always take whatever their normal allotment is within the teacher contract. So it's a fair assumption to think that not everybody's going to take 100% of what they're obligated to take. The difference between the 75% and the 100% is about $15,000. I feel it would be a little bit better to kind of hold back on those funds, and then if we do need them, then we can transfer them. If we were to transfer them right away and put all 49 into the RC 28, and let's say something else kind of pops up, then we're looking to maybe potentially transfer money back out of
Okay.
RC 28 into whatever.
Hey, Rich, just to be clear, part of that, there is a cutoff date that we were very clear on, so we don't bump up against end of
End of
year
the school year,
graduation.
correct.
So they can only take that day up till, what's the date?
I believe it's the middle of May.
Middle of May, and then they can no longer take that day thereafter.
So we got a very small window,
Yes.
or they, I should say they.
Right.
So we were also, the negotiations were later this year compared to last year. So again, it's more of a compressed time frame.
Okay, and then just the decision to put it in COVID related, I mean, I was part of that negotiations committee, and I don't want to go too far into what we
Sure.
discussed, but from an
Um,
accounting standpoint.
So
anyway.
we didn't want to have it included in the general RCs because it is a little bit inflated. So if you were to fast forward a year and you wanted to compare your substitute rate from this year to another year, it is going to be a little skewed because you have granted them an additional personal day, and really the negotiations were an impact related to COVID.
Okay,
So that's why we did put it in RC 28. So it kind of takes that out if you were going to do a year over year comparison in a future year.
no, it's great. It's like one time in nature, basically, is what you're saying. Okay. Go.
But related to that, what you're saying is the substitute rate, which is the other side of it, will be a little skewed next year.
Correct.
Thank you.
I had a different question. So ELP, you say should enrollment grow during the year, it would be anticipated this would be filled. How much enrollment?
So sometimes we end up getting students based on their birthday who start in March, for example. You won't collect the full tuition amount because it's prorated from, let's say, March to the end of June. So instead of getting, let's say, $7,000, you're only going to get a few $1,000s in that case. Right now, we're just assuming the students that we know are either here or we have a confirmed deposit that they're going to start at some point. So it's not going to close that gap completely, even if we get a couple of students who come in March.
Okay, thanks. RC 18, the second sentence you reduced from 21,500 to 10,000. But you say savings of 1,000. Is that a typo there, or am I?
No,
missing
so in a
something?
previous meeting, the board did approve a transfer to cover an expense. And so now the savings in the account is only 1,000.
Thank you. And then the last one, you talked about turnover savings, and again, maybe we have to have a sit down. You can help me understand the mathematics around turnover, just so I understand. And I get what's going on. We have the turnover savings have been reduced by about 9,300 because teachers hired mid-year have been more expensive than those who have left. And I guess I want to try to keep this to this year, this update. But when I think about next year, is this just a basic trend we're seeing, and are we budgeting for that going forward?
We're seeing a lot more teachers leave than in a typical year. There is a teacher shortage, as Mark just talked about. And so due to a teacher shortage, you tend not to get those teachers at that absolute lowest step level.
Okay,
So Marge has talked about a lot of districts are kind of just trading teachers now back and forth. And so you're getting more expensive teachers who kind of will transfer between districts essentially. And so the compression, there's a little bit of compression in terms of salaries.
so when I asked the question on Tuesday, when we talk about the budget, I'm going to ask if that's reflected in that future budget. Okay, thank you.
Related to that, we also had a lot of teachers who were early on in their step progression. So is that impacting turnover as well?
It is, yeah. So the teachers who left, who might have left at, let's say, Masters 8 or Masters 9, might have gotten replaced by someone in a Masters 12 or 13. And so in that sense, you're actually getting the inverse of turnover savings. You're actually paying more for that teacher.
And so when we, similarly, is that reflected in next year's turnover as well?
Yep, so we've actually seen well over 50 staff members leave. So in next year's budget, we budgeted 30, and the reason we budgeted 30 is we looked at the actual staff members who left where we did yield a turnover savings, and we kind of excluded those who left where we didn't get a turnover savings, so that we'd have more of an appropriate turnover savings.
Thank you.
And then I'll
Hey,
wait.
Rich, John, could I interject?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on that trading teachers between districts, is there an inherent increase in the cost if it's a teacher we really want? Or do we have the flexibility within steps and contracts to pay up a little for that teacher? So are you seeing that built into the
So if
market
there's,
too?
if it's a shortage area,
Yeah.
the superintendent does have the authority to grant a couple of extra steps.
Okay,
So it depends really on the area of the teacher.
but that also could affect dollars and
Yep.
cents as that whole market progresses.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Are we, but are you seeing them leaving because of money, or is it more that there's openings near where they're living? And
It's a
just where
mixture of
the-
both. Some are going to Westchester where it is for more money.
Yeah, yeah.
Some are going because they want to be closer to home. Some of them are going because of the commute. So it's a variety. of reasons.
And some, including teachers across the state and country, are leaving because of the current climate and COVID and everything else. It's just the context of education at the moment.
It's fascinating how the quality of life element has become more important in people's
To
decisions.
everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I'm here and not in the city right now. I think I'll wait to ask a question on the transfers for the RC 19. So any other questions along here? All right, Grant.
So not any real significant changes to the grant. We did highlight the IDA ARP grant reflects that we intend to use that in fiscal 23 for the additional speech and language pathologist and the psychologist as reflected in the budget. In the ARP ESSER funds, we did reduce the available balance. There were some additional smart boards purchased. And then just moving on to the food service report, we did have a very good November and December, about a 66% improvement. So the P&L does stand a negative 44,665. And then just again, typically food service fund doesn't become cash flow positive until the spring. You kind of have to get out of those initial costs, whether it's pension costs, some health insurance costs, and then just the startup cost for food. Average daily sales have continued to grow. I would expect January to be slightly lower because we do have midterms at the high school. We've had a couple of snow days, and then we did have some low enrollment that first week back from December break from students who were out with COVID. But all in all, we anticipate the fund being a positive $62,000 by the end of the year.
Great. So I guess we go to Trent. What question?
Is the team grant a new grant or is that some, I haven't seen that before.
Which one?
The team mentor grant?
Sure. So we do typically get it every year. It's something that's declined by the state. So it is intended to reimburse the cost of team, which is like student or teacher mentorship. We have not received anything yet. So right now it's at a 0. It typically does not pay for the whole amount. So in RC 18, you actually see a portion of the budget covering the balance.
Anybody else? And move next, but
Transfers.
next item, we'll talk about transfers.
So we do have 4 transfers for consideration and approval. The first transfer is for $34,000, and that would be to cover the substitutes for RC 28 due to the teacher MOU. We are recommending taking the majority of money from some savings in clubs and councils, salary savings from the ELP teacher aid, some available funds in workers' compensation, that $1,000 that's left in the teacher and resident membership in RC 18, and then a little bit of money from sewer savings and property insurance savings. The second transfer is for $10,000 for some additional PPEs, and we're recommending taking some of that from salary savings from a custodian and sewer savings. The third transfer is really, again, just an accounting adjustment, but it does cross object codes. For $15,000, we did have to bring in some temporary facilities help due to some staff members that are out on workers' comp. So taking those worker comp reimbursements and moving it to the part-time help in RC 12. And then the fourth transfer is for $40,000, and that would be to fund the DEI consultant. The majority of funds coming from the savings in legal fees, $28,000, $5,000 from consultant fees in RC 16, $3,000 from professional development in RC 16, $2,500 from itinerant travel in RC 19, and then $1,400 from property insurance.
All right, I just want to frame this discussion. So we're a finance committee, right? And I think I want to, as a committee, focus on the financial and qualitative aspects of the transfers. I know one transfer has kind of reached the realm of a hot button issue in town, but I think it's the committee's charge to do the financial analytics around the superintendent's request. And, you know, in my recommendation is just let's assume that the request, or let's discuss whether the request is within the bounds of the proper spending and budgeting. And then any qualitative aspects, I would ask that any members of this committee just take it to the board level, because I think there will probably be a broader discussion around the qualitative aspects of this. So I've also asked Dr. Adley, just give a little history, because we started discussing this in the fall around some incidents of hate, and again, I think it was driven by the board's request to do something, if I could say it that way. And I just want him to outline the requests in the history of this and why we're seeing it as a board for the first time, or as a subcommittee for the first time today, and as board on Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request for 40,000, as the board knows, was reduced from 56 by 16 because of the time process, and we would have had other activities taking place, so it's reduced to the 40,000. Back in September 10th, the board got its first update on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there were really no issues at that particular point. Mr. Shelton was coming on board at that particular point. Since that meeting, close thereafter, we had a number of issues of racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, so on, that transpired and that needed immediate attention. And on the meeting of October 26th, we discussed Mr. Shelton continuing his services. In all honesty, we did interview other. Well, in all honesty, we interviewed other companies, consultants, but I also felt that this was a significant timing issue given the urgency of the matter. I exercised my right primarily through policy 3125 under the timing of being important and also the uniqueness of qualification. So the 2 days after that meeting, Mr. Shelton also worked with students and staff. That was already in the budget. Those were funds that were already budgeted for. So the board was aware of that. Essentially, during that meeting of October 26th, there came a discussion, an understandable discussion about the board's role and decision making. And we also had members of the public who participated in that particular meeting. So it was with that that in November we interviewed Mr. Shelton. And I just wanted to make sure that if it came to this particular point, that everybody had enough information, the board had enough information. This was ultimately the approval process, given that I exercised under the policy, the purchasing agreement policy, the superintendent's right to make that decision administratively. We did bring Mr. Shelton here before the board and before the public, just recognizing the discussions that were ensuing, the concerns, the questions. So in all transparency, we brought him here before the board. At any given point, we could have collectively moved this, expedited this at any particular point, but we worked with the actual processes and the meetings that had been scheduled primarily. We did do that additional one for Mr. Shelton, but we just worked with the processes of coming through the finance committee, given the schedule, which really December, there is really no meeting. And so therefore we come through here. This is really given the transfer. Honestly, pragmatically, I don't want to get to the table and have a big argument about there's no funds for it, because ultimately the board does have that right. And this was going to contribute to more funds. It wasn't covered in the budget. So therefore you would see it here. So I wanted to make sure that people would be supportive, do the best I could to make sure people had enough information to be supportive as it comes through this particular budget process. So that sort of brings us up to speed. We also had a December meeting where Mr. Tramberg talked about a revised schedule, what Mr. Shelton would be doing and what he has done, what he subsequently would be doing for the rest of the year. So that's a quick synopsis of the time period and the process.
Thank you. It was more than I was looking for, so I deeply appreciate it. And to your point, the budget surplus as projected now has risen to almost $340,000. We have also discussed some conservatism in some of the assumptions in this budget as well, some of the projections as well. So that might even change for the better. I love it. I love talking about surpluses. So what I'd love to do is any comments, questions about the transfers?
I just want to make a quick comment.
Yeah. Closer to the mic.
So I agree with Mr. Sini in the fact that our charge here is about the finances. And it's not to have a qualitative discussion at the moment. So I will leave that to the board meeting. I will just comment that the last time that we discussed this in Finance Committee was that this 40,000 was not necessarily Ken Shelton, but DEI. I know there's been a lot of discussion, and I just want to say that people are not against DEI. People are unhappy with the process, as am I. And I will leave it at that and have a conversation at the board meeting.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just real quick.
Close to the
Rich.
mic, Duke, okay?
Yeah, sorry, thanks. Rich, just real quick on the bottom transfer, $3,000 out of professional development. Just, I hate to see anything going out of professional development because we talk about how much we need and how much we want to do. So we're not cutting, shortchanging anything there.
No, it's professional development
For
actually
me.
the superintendent.
Say that again?
It's professional development for the superintendent.
Oh, no way then. No way.
It's okay. I thought that would go over okay.
Thank you, Rich.
Is it a time issue?
It's actually a state of the COVID situation of things that ordinarily, actually I would attend, have been deferred.
Okay, no, thanks for that color,
Thank
actually.
you.
So what we do here is we don't vote per se, but I'd love to get a board consensus. Do you want to do each transfer as one, or you just want to make a recommendation?
So when you say a consensus of that,
I'm trying to get a sense of this committee, whether or not we would make a unanimous recommendation to the board on each transfer or as a lump sum.
okay,
So it's a process question first. Would you like me to go transfer by transfer? Let's do that.
Okay.
Okay, so the first transfer, sorry, I lost my page now. No, that's not the page I was looking for. Yeah, what did that? Oh, here it is, sorry. Okay, so the first, I had my notes. So the first transfer is to substitutes, the 34,000. Do we have a broad consensus to make a recommendation to the board to? Okay. So I will make a recommendation to the board to execute that transfer. Transfer number 2, health supplies, $10,000. Do we have a broad consensus?
Yes.
Okay, unanimous consensus. I don't want to use broad, sorry. Transfer number 3, part-time help. Now, this is an accounting adjustment, so I'm assuming it's, okay,
Yes.
right, okay. And then the 4th, again, without taking a vote, but give me some color, please. Is this going to be a unanimous recommendation? If you want to abstain or not give a recommendation, that's perfectly okay, and I'll report that back to the board.
I'll abstain at this point.
Okay,
I think there's an approval with questions to follow Tuesday evening.
okay, so we have a broad but not unanimous recommendation. Is that a good way to frame it? Okay, thank you. Let's see, because, I'm sorry, I didn't comment. I'm broad. I'm part of the broad part. So then we're going to talk about the Special Education Reserve Fund, which is held at the town level. It's something we covered during our retreat, but I believe we did not execute with some sort of communication to the Board of Finance in early January. I think Duke and I received an email from Mr. Palin. Sorry, we just got that out. I just remembered we got it. Asking about, what the status was. That will be part of the board packet, I believe, right, Dr. Adley? I circulated to you. So it's, if I remember the discussion right, Jill was kind enough to kind of go back and look at it, but we framed it as that's not really our account to control, and we explored the history of it. And it's my I remember is just basically saying there was no pushback from this board or recommendation not to collapse that special education fund into the general fund. And as I understand it, it's not really my place to speak for the Board of Finance, but what they're trying to do is clean up restricted accounts and collapse them into the general fund for a number of different reasons. I'll let Mr. Palin and the Board of Finance explain that if anybody has questions. But Jill, can you just go back to the discussion also that we had?
Yes, so I think where the board left it was that we were looking for just confirmation from Tom Mooney that the board didn't, whether or not the board needed to take a role, I think, take a vote. Because I think there was typically there would be written documentation, setting up the account and the purpose of it, but it sounded like it's in a box in the basement and it's fairly onerous to recover. So I think we wanted to hear from Tom about whether or not we needed to be a part of that conversation. I don't know if Tom has confirmed that or not.
Yes, he has.
He has. Okay, so we just need to.
I thought I mentioned that previously, that I spoke to Tom, and this, if we wanted the funds,
Yeah.
we would have to go through the normal appropriation process anyhow.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
based on the information that I went over with him, and then
Okay.
again, this goes back well over a decade.
yeah,
Jen Charnowski was involved in trying to confirm all this.
Yes.
It's strictly, and I gave back to the Board of Finance, the overall consensus of the board was, we
Yes.
really have nothing to do with this. If we wanted the money, we would go through an appropriation process anyhow. So
yeah,
in line with what you're trying to do from an accounting standpoint, the board at that time seemed okay with
yes,
them collapsing it into the bigger picture.
So we wanted to discuss it, highlight it, it's coming to the board, and then we'll make in my opinion, it's like almost like just a conversation. The board is really taking no action. It's really your decision. But we'll make that determination at the board level. So I just want to highlight that. Anything else you have to add, Dr. Adley?
No, I just would actually, just for clarification on this particular item, it was going to the board level, is it going to be reported out under the finance committee report out, or is it a separate agenda item?
What do you want to do? I mean, I can do it, the finance committee.
You do it within the finance committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And now we leave public comment. Again, my apologies if we have extended public comment. I will have to leave in about 7 minutes. We will start in person. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
a form of the, I don't know, never mind.
Yeah,
I don't know.
okay.
Before I get into the meat of my comments, I just wanted to make a comment about the residential outplacements. I know a few that have gone directly from a residential school directly to Fitch, whereas prior to Fitch, they would have been more likely to go to a therapeutic day school like Spire. So this obviously not only benefits us financially, but it's also great for the kids to be reunited with their friends. So getting on to the transfer. Ken Shelton has been in our schools for a few months working with both students and staff. I have only heard positive remarks about him. He is already familiar with our schools and we are already familiar with him. It makes sense for him to continue working with us. Actions in our community tell me that we are in desperate need of Mr. Shelton. Take a moment to remember all of the public comments from students, alumni, and parents regarding prejudice and bullying. Remember how you felt listening to the students emotionally tell their stories. Despite these stories, a local anonymous website posted, quote, "Anyone else feel like there has been a sudden explosion of consciousness in this town around issues of racism, white supremacy, classism, bias, homophobia, and prejudice," unquote. A petition linked to the same anonymous website urges parents to sign the petition, which opposes both open choice and Ken Shelton. The fact that someone chose to combine two diversity initiatives into one petition indicates that the petition is really about opposing diversity, period. Ironically, the denial of hate in our town and this petition are even more evidence as to why we need Ken Shelton. Please approve the transfer.
Just a point of fact, we don't approve anything just so here. Yeah. Any other comments? Anybody online?
Yes. Keep your public comment, please click the participant on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Click the option. You will be identified by name and or number. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Erin Noonan, you are recognized and unmuted.
Good morning. My name is Erin Noonan and I live at 5 High School Lane and I have 3 children enrolled in the Darien Public Schools. I'm speaking to you today to urge you to vote in favor of Mr. Shelton on Tuesday night. I have watched the Board of Education meetings, including the one in which Mr. Shelton was interviewed. I have read the petition and the social media posts, and most importantly, I have read the proposal from the administration. I have thoughtfully considered the arguments of those who oppose Mr. Shelton, and here's my take. Some adults are disappointed about the process, as Mrs. Worm reiterated this morning. Some adults are fearful that Mr. Shelton will have influence over grading policies or AP offerings, something that the people in this meeting absolutely know would never happen on your watch. Some adults don't like that he lives out of state, recently labeling him a California consultant. And some adults clearly have ulterior motives. I urge you to think about the students. Think about the students who cried at the podium in October, sharing their personal stories of being ostracized and physically, verbally, and emotionally abused at Darien High School, simply because they are seen as different from their peers. Sorry. Think about the students who met with Mr. Shelton in the fall. Those students told Mr. Shelton that they wished they could talk more about social issues in schools, and they want to feel that the adults are actually listening. So can you please, on Tuesday, show the students that you are listening, show them through the transfer, through your vote, that you believe this work is needed. Even if some of you do not see Ken Shelton as a long-term solution, show the students that you understand that something must be done in the near term. Show them that we cannot, in January, start from square one. This work is important, it's emotional, it's hard. But this work will make our students, our children, feel seen and heard and loved. I implore you to vote in favor of Mr. Shelton. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Ms. Teresa Vogt, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hold on, let me turn off my camera. There. Teresa Vogt, 22 Circle Road. When I hear you guys talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the process of it, I just want you to remember, diversity, equity, inclusion could be the color of your skin. It could be the religion you may or may not practice at home. It could be your economic circumstances in this town. It could be your gender identity, your gender sexual, how you identify with your sexuality. It could be neurodiversity too, the kids who have learning differences. So a vote against DEI, is it basically a vote against all of that? Or is it a vote against teaching our kids about others? I've heard arguments against Ken Shelton because he's only worked in urban school districts, or he's from California, that he's never worked in a small, predominantly white town like Darien. I would argue that that makes him then the perfect solution for teaching DEI in our town. You can't have somebody who doesn't have experiences outside a predominantly white small town teach our kids about DEI. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Didn't have to leave early. Well, thank you, everybody, for your comments. And I guess we have 2 meetings next week.
We do, Monday, yes, Monday and on Tuesday, yes.
Okay, great. So we'll see a lot of you then. Can I get a motion for adjournment?